So much. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Ivan, Harvey and Brandon. We did say, maybe easy if you introduce yourselves, so maybe we can start with you, Ivan, and we'll go around, but
yes,
set the topic.
Of course. So I'm the head of internal audit in the Santander CIB UK business here, with more than, say, 15 years of experience in audit and around 20 in banking, and I'm here responsible of basically defining the plans and audit stuff here in the UK.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Harvey Booland. I'm the head of controls at Shell. Been at Shell for 17 years. Prior to that, I was in external audit, and in Shell, I've done a variety of controller roles. And most latterly, as head of controls, I head up the LOG2 finance function, which means I run the financial control framework for Shell, and particularly head up the SOX program.
Hello, I'm Brandon Wright. I'm head of books and records audit at Bilfinger SE. Bilfinger SE is a German company located in Mannheim, engineering company, oil and gas company. What's books and records audit? Our department is split between books and records, what we call books and records traditional audit, financial audits, operational ICS audit, and we have a separate team, project audit. So I'm over that books and records side.
Great, thank you. So thanks, team. We spoke before, and one of the key things, we sort of looked at the title, and we talked about this 3 lines of defence, and I questioned that word defence, because the IIA back in 2019 removed the word defence, and we're looking very much for the internal controls audit team, the internal audit team, to be more collaborative and be more engaged with the management. And I was trying to say, how do you feel about that? Do you think it's still defence? Do you think it's very separate segregation of duties? Is there separacy? How are you coping with working together, and your views on, is it 3 lines or 3 lines of defence? And maybe, Harvey, go to you first.
So, I recognise what you say in terms of that traditional label that includes defence. I don't think really applies as much these days. I think certainly what we look for from our organisation, both at LOD2 for me, our internal audit function at LOD3, it's a partnership model where we look to people not to, just be control specialists, but to be risk managers, partner with the business, partner with the function, finance in my place, and work with them to ensure that we're just managing process in a way that is inherently controlled and not as this kind of traditional either separate compliance layer or as a checking function on what the front line is doing.
Ivan?
Yes, I think totally agree. I think the objective of this journey is basically to work together and be very, very close to the senior management and attending what are the main objectives from them as well, and also to work with, in our case, with first and second line colleagues to define what is going to be the assurance for different years, and focusing on the more relevant aspects for the senior management as well. Yeah.
And I think is 3 lines or 3 lines of defense. I look at it from our organization. I see it as like the doers, the monitors, and the assessors. That's kind of the way I would define it. I think you can say 3 lines, but you need to make sure which line you're in. If you're in internal audit, like we are, we take on a lot of responsibility with a limited amount of resources. And we can get involved working closely with the second line and even the first line, where sometimes these individuals start thinking maybe we're all 3 lines, and they can kind of move back. So it's important that there's that distinction on who's establishing the processes, who's establishing the controls and the policies, who's following them, who's acting on them, the first line, and who really assesses that, which is us in internal audit.
Brilliant. Do you think there is a better, I'll come back to you there on Brandon, and do you still find that you're sort of seen as the police, or is there much more collaboration in the business across now that it's a new world, shall we say? The internal audit were considered the enemy by many first and second lines, certainly the first line.
Well, I can say I can relate to that strongly. I don't know if you know, but Bilfinger went through an FCPA violation and a DOJ monitorship deferred prosecution agreement. So I came to Bill Finger and introduced their anti-corruption audit methodology. So we were very much known as the police. I would never dispute that. And then we moved to auditing more internal controls. And I think we got more, people talked to us more. They weren't standing away. And for the last couple of years, and after we passed the extended deferred prosecution agreement, we've now moved over to the operational audit approach, where we're actually helping the business improve their processes, improve their working capital management, improve other processes. So we have moved very much from the policing over to the collaboration. Yeah, I don't want to say consulting, but collaboration. That's right. Yeah. So we've made that move. It's good to continue that communication, though, and working also with the second line on their policies and procedures, not just going straight out to the entities and say, hey, you're not following this procedure, but also talk to the second line. Maybe they need to amend their procedures and policies. And there we're also adding value to both lines in that respect. So we're respected in that sense, yes.
Ivan, you find the same?
Yes, I think we've been through a journey on this internal audit role, and I think now first we need to show the business and the senior management that we are not just here to delimit the business and you cannot do this, but also to add value to the business, and this is in our duty to show them that we are able to add value. We can help them to identify some weaknesses that probably they don't know, or even sometimes, as he said, I mean, being the consultant of the business about improving processes, introducing the efficiency aspect in our reviews, not just as I say, just marking the red lines that they cannot cross, but helping the business on being more efficient and being more effective, and this is the way that we should evolve as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I still do have moments where I walk into rooms and you can see them thinking, "Oh my God, it's the head of controls. What is it? You know, what does he want?" But there's a strong role that we ask our organisation to play, in either the design work they're doing or the testing that they're doing, to pick up not just control deficiencies, but control optimization, control improvement, systems. So in a company like Shell, where you've got essentially a business of businesses, LOD2 gets a decent view of what would work across the organisation that they might not think about individually. So there's a strong part of that. But I would say, it's not all one way. It's not all, we've got to be super collaborative, because there is a role for setting the standard and holding people account. And so what we try to imbue in the organisation is that balance, is picking the moment for when they have to hold a firm line versus, when they are working in conjunction with the business.
Thanks for that. The next question is really focused on those internal controls and testings. And do you find that you are doing a double effort? Is there a lot of duplication in terms of what the front line's already done, the first line's done? Do you find that you're repeating that, or are you viewing that? How does that actually work, and what are the key controls that you would test in the audit world?
So, maybe I'll start. The interesting thing is, historically we had duplication between second line and third line in terms of testing, which was not terribly efficient, just partly because you double up on effort, and often you then find differences of opinion that you have to reconcile and fix. So we've done a lot of work in making sure that we don't overlap too much. There's a little bit of overlap more that we dovetail between those two lines. But actually my reflection has always been that there's been an over-reliance upon the second line and third line for assurance. So we don't find they're duplicating what's being done in the front line, more that we have a increasing expectation as to the amount that they should be assuring themselves. Some of that, we might get into it, is this piece about continuous accounting, continuous control monitoring, and all the rest of it. We're trying to equip them with mechanisms that they themselves can be happy that they are in control without someone having to come in and tell them yes or no.
I think what we've had, before we had a design team who designed our controls, and we performed all the testing. internal audit. This was like during the monitorship when we had to really test those compliance-related controls. So it was, the first line, I think, was kind of waiting on us to come in and tell them if it's right or not. We then, from the design perspective, we moved to what we would call control self-assessments, where the first line actually assesses their controls to begin with, to see if they're see if they're effective. And then, of course, they would localize the controls. The second line would review that. So the first line then kind of has more of a say of whether their controls are effective or not waiting for us to come in and them saying, okay, well, tell us what we did wrong this time. And then you do that final testing, operating effectiveness testing from the third line after you've covered this level of assurance on the first and the second lines. That's how we've kind of evolved in that from that perspective.
Yes, I think, as I said, I mean, in the past there were a lot of duplications because we were working in silos. Let's say first line doing their work, in general more focus on business, not so much on controls. Second line obviously doing their bit, and we, as a totally different part of the organization, just going there, telling the people, you are doing this wrong, and that was the model. I think, I would say since 5 years ago, something like this, we are evolving this and being more transparent among all the lines, which I think is the key part of this, because in the end we are all same organization, and sometimes I think we forget this, but with this transparency, we show the second line what we do, what we are going to do, which I think in this moment of the year we are all in this process about defining next year's plan and putting all the efforts in the same focus and let's say agreeing what will be the assurance and how we can work together on providing more value to the organization, which I think is the final objective of all the lines.
Yeah. Now, there's been a lot of drive and focus to drive agile and thematic audit and be able to pick up. Do you get to sort of have a holistic view across all the controls previously tested in order? Are your systems there that you're seeing what the first and second line are doing easily, that you can plan ahead and plan and be thematic? Anyone? Take an order.
In my case, historically it has been difficult because first, in general, we are human beings and we tend to not spend so much time on registering, labeling, and on all these kind of things, so you start seeing a lot of things not updated and so on. I think in the last years this has again evolved. The technology has helped us a lot on these aspects. It's more agile, and I think all the organizations are more, let's say, aware about the importance of updating all these kind of things, and we have, in general, information quite online. I would say sometimes it's not the best, but I think we do our best on this, and obviously this helps us to focus and identify the key priorities on the organization and be, as you say, being agile and adapting our plans to these kind of things. Sometimes, just among us, the regulators doesn't help because they are asking us to do this 3 years plan, 4 years plan, which in the world that we are living now is 3 years is
lifetime.
It's incredible. Yeah. But obviously we need to adapt this methodology and being more stick to the reality. Having a lot of interaction with the senior management and understanding where are the key focus for all those organizations.
Harvey.
So I think it's a pretty mixed bag for us, really. We have areas of strength in terms of following that thematic approach, and good areas of data that allows us to do that. That is really built on a history of compliance activity. So, the SOX is my bread and butter. We're good in finance. We're very good in IT, our trading business. is improving. But it's a mixed picture in other parts of the business. What we do see is the demand for it, both internally and externally in terms of regulatory expectation. It's just something we're continuing to build across, because it's, there's this real desire to provide insight, and that you talk about thematic auditing, thematic testing. That's really where the insight lies. It's not this randomized traditional approach that we previously took 10 years ago.
I think we are following more of an agile approach. I mean, I believe now our first line takes more responsibility for the controls. They're not responsible for the design of controls, but responsible for the fact that they're operating effective through the control self-assessment. Maybe we've entrusted them in that, in making these self-assessments and then evaluating those, and then we see, okay, they are embracing the controls. So that fosters a better working relationship, because we're trusting each other. Trust but verify, right? And then afterwards, in the context of our operational audits, we will go back and test selective controls, but not as intensely as we did before. And we have a much better continual exchange now between the second line on ensuring that the policies are addressing those high-risk areas. So we've had continuous improvement in that area. And I think that came also from the past of having this hard policing that you had mentioned before, this policing approach, and it kind of shocked everyone into it. But now we have a much more smoother approach, and we can now move in focusing on those operational risks. However, we have to keep those compliance controls, compliance risks always in the top of our mind.
Do you have any challenges getting ownership in the front line, given they don't design the controls?
Well, we have the group controls, and then the local entities, they're required to localize those controls. So if they localize them...
Okay, they take ownership at that point.
They do. That's correct, yes.
So we had this discussion in preparation, and it was quite key, because in the financial world, there's SMCR, the ownership was very clearly defined to the first line, and that seems to be quite effective, and we were saying that has been successful. I know some banks invented the 1.5 line of defence and just sort of palmed it off for others to do it, but they still took ownership of it, shall we say. But we don't really see that kind of regulation at the moment in the corporate world and the energy world. How do you think you tackle that, Harvey?
So I think so there's a couple of parts to that. I think within Shell, generally we have good ownership of risk management, because it's just baked into the culture because of the nature of the activity that we undertake. And there are some real shop window approaches to risk management around health and safety and environmental and operational, that really then flow through in terms of our whole approach. What I found interesting recently is that, as you say, there's no SMR equivalent in the corporate world, certainly not in the UK, and we're having this discussion around UK corporate governance. And there's been quite a lot of pushback about that. Do I really own this? Should I really sign off on my controls? To the extent that actually the SOX element of it appears to have been dropped from the proposal. So I think there's still a lot more to be done in the corporate world, and it's something we continue to drive, and trying to strike this balance between maybe a SOX type framework, which is quite laborious, to what is fit for purpose and what is the right level of business and leadership accountability over risk management. Ongoing discussion.
Just thinking about accountability from the first level, if we look at it from the standpoint of performing our audits, if we find control deficiencies on an audit, we identify those in a report and the related risks. We don't tell the entity what to do. We have what we call agreed upon corrective actions, right?
Yep.
So we're agreeing what you need to do to ensure your control is working. And then they agree with our report, they give a responsible person a due date, and then we track those findings. And then after a period of time, if those findings have not been remediated, then you have the escalation process. So, but we're not telling them what they have to do. We're letting them tell us, well, not tell us, but work with us to say this is our agreed upon approach. And that helps them also to know that they're held accountable and must take ownership.
Good. I'm going to bundle two questions together before you can come back to this. I didn't want to take you out, Ivan, but I wanted to move on quickly to look at, UK SOX. It's been coming, not coming. We're all sort of in arms, wondering what's actually going to be included and where it will stand. But also, when we looked at what's the purpose and what are they trying to achieve with legislation, it was very much we were looking at all the things like the Bryden report. There's so many controls. You expected to look at the whole population, use more automation, more continuous controls, and try and reduce that risk by expanding the capabilities, shall we say, of automation. Have you embraced that, and what sort of controls are applicable to continuous controls monitoring, and anything you can talk about regulation and how you think that's going to help avoid the Carillions and the patisserie Valeries and all the things that these legislations are supposed to be achieving? And I'll start off with Ivan, because I missed you out on the last one.
So, well, in our case, as we are a third country branch, the UK SOX will not apply, but it's true that, as always, the UK regulators always ask us to have similar outcomes as we were a subsidiary here. It's true that the continuous monitoring is again the next step of evolution of internal audit. So we in Santander, we've started this process. It's difficult because, as always, the data is key for all these kind of things, and it's quite difficult to gather data and all this and manage the data and everything. But again, is the next step. We need to have online data of the status of the controls. For that is critical, as my colleagues were saying, that the first line takes ownership on the assessment of the controls. They are very clear on who is responsible of what. As you say, I'm coming back to the SMF a little bit, in our wall is super clear who is responsible of what, and they need to prepare and have a proper control framework to fulfill these kind of things. But in general, this helps us to identify very quickly issues and rethink about our plan and attend the proper focus on or issues that are having, or a lot of controls that have deficiencies, and start doing root cause analysis and these kind of things. So, in our case, yeah, is critical to go to this stage. Yeah.
I mean, on the whole UK corporate governance reform piece, I guess the first thing to say is the whole thing is surrounded by uncertainty. We saw some proposals earlier this year, but they're very light on detail, very uncertain in terms of timing. And then there's the whole UK political situation. I'm sure there's time for another Prime Minister before Christmas. But and there are two distinct lenses. There's the audit lens, which I won't touch on. It came from a view that something is broken if you see Carillion fail, or VHS, or patisserie Valerie you mentioned. Something's broken. But from the corporate perspective, that's all about transparency. So fraud reporting, how you agree an assurance plan, what you're going to have externally audited beyond your financials. Being much more explicit about your conclusion on internal controls, dividend reporting and resilience. And so we're taking it in that spirit. We're working on it now, even though there is uncertainty around it. There's lots that we can do, that we can bring, because we think we've got a story to tell about how we manage the control framework, how we look at and assess and respond to risks. So there are all of those parts that we think we can start bringing forward. And as I say, that's work in progress right now.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, for us, my answer might be brief because we're a German traded company, so that doesn't apply. But just going back to what we went through in the past, I know SOX from the U.S. and also previous companies. When we had our issues, we adopted our internal control system based on the COSO framework, which is with SOX. So I always said we have SOX Lite. But for the UK SOX, I guess that's really not something that would apply to Bilfing.
I think we're seeing the European Union start fishing, though, aren't we, in terms of corporate governance reform? So
Yes.
It'll come to all of us eventually.
Right. We just have to stay on top of it and what's required, in fact.
How about that automation and the continuous controls monitoring? Do you see particular controls where that's suitable? Are you using that? Are you working on that area at the moment?
We've looked into that. We have not gotten very far with automating controls. We've also looked at automating our audit approach, which we're still working on, and process mining from the audit point of view. We're a company who has bought a lot of individual companies. We don't have one standalone IT system. So to the extent that we can automate controls, it would be like in islands based on regions or entities, to where we have not, honestly haven't reached a level to where we're looking at automating controls. Let me put it that way, but we haven't reached that level of maturity as yet. I would have to say that.
Harvey?
So we've been looking hard, and we've actually started work on it. So if you talk about CCM specifically, CCM works very well if you have automated your processes, whether that's finance, business, or IT. And so we are just going through a quite substantial change program on the ERP side, which will completely rebuild our processes around operations, finance, and IT. And we're looking then to build in a CCM layer as part of that, because we essentially want the system to automate the control, system to automate the process, and then we want a monitoring capability that sits upon that. We've got a little bit of that now, but it needs to broaden quite substantially.
And how about yourself, Ivan?
In our cases, I think it's the same. There are some pilots on automating controls, and from third line of defense on automating monitoring. It's true that we in Santander we created, let's say, the frame of this, but in the end you need data, and we ended up in a situation that we automated dashboards, but all the data that are feeding these dashboards require a huge amount of time of managing the data, transforming the data, and so on, which we finally decided that we need to stop this and rethink again from the beginning, because the objective of this is first to increase the coverage of our testing, or let's say speed this process up. So if we are not let's say achieving any of these objectives, we need to start from the beginning and analyze what is needed, and as my colleague said, the data is key for this, and we need proper systems, proper data, and start managing all these kind of things. Okay.
Thank you for that. I think just one question from the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, very sensitive topic. I know our board have been asking us that question of strategic risk. It doesn't fit into the typical mold of risk and controls. To what extent are you looking at strategic risk controls management, have the right controls in place to implement the strategy to track, measure progress, given that oftentimes we do get a lot of strategic change, new management comes in, they put in a new strategy, most times will not work, and what do you see as the role of internal audit measuring that?
Well, we're part of Bilfinger, we're part of the risk committee, where there's a risk committee that aggregates the risk across the regions. We have top 10 risks, and audit is also part of that. Now, some of these are operational, they're strategic, and they're compliance risks. And we're always part of that team so that we can address those strategic risks that would fall in the line of internal audit. So as the strategy changes, the risk can not maybe change, the risk may not change, but the prioritization of risk may change. And it's also important to have that risk committee or risk team, if you have one, that has your corporate leaders as part of it, your second line, your compliance compliance and your internal audit to stay in continual communication and collaborate those strategic risks.
In our case, we usually review strategic risks in two angles. First, in the same way we are part of the key committees in the organization, we are part of the risk committee, the executive committee, and so on. And we are also auditing the different strategic plans. So the 3 years plan, the financial plan, where basically this is the final base of all the future developments of the business, and we review documentation of these aspects, how they model the evolution of the business into financial plans, and so on.
So without more ado, thank you all very much indeed. Time went very quickly. I know I could ask you a million more questions and we could talk for ages, but I think we've hit the time. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.